Welcome back, Sebastian here. So time for my power rankings for the 2025 Dutch Grand Prix. Pretty interesting, pretty dramatic race, I must say. So getting started right away with number 20, it is Kimi Antonelli. So for Antonelli qualified, let's see here. Antonelli qualified in 11th. Out-qualified by his teammate George Russell by 1.8 tenths of a second. So while the qualifying gap itself between himself and Russell, honestly not too bad, again knocked out in Q2. In the Grand Prix, didn't make up a ton of positions in the early first stint of the race, and then of course had that coming together with Leclerc, I think quite clumsy on Antonelli's part, and then the compound matters. He then picked up a 5-second penalty for speeding. So 15 seconds worth of penalties in the race. In a race with 2 safety cars, I believe, and one quite late on. Actually, yeah, 3 safety cars, I should say. And one quite late on meant that penalty dropped him from 6 on the road to 15. So even though he was pretty quick, unfortunately, 2 kind of sloppy, unnecessary penalties means that he is last on my power rankings. So moving up over to number 19, and this is Lewis Hamilton. So for Hamilton, qualified 7th, out-qualified by his teammate Leclerc by 0.05 of a second. So pretty small margin in qualifying, which again is good. But I do think Leclerc did underperform a little bit in Q3. His time from Q3 was a little bit slower than his time from Q2, which does suggest that there was a little bit more time there. In the race, of course, a bit of a clumsy error and clattered the barriers at the exit of turn 3, and his race was finished there. And given what happened to other drivers around him in the Grand Prix, obviously he was the first driver to crash, so without that crash, the race likely ends up quite different anyway. But again, there were a lot of points on offer, and he could have easily finished 5th in this Grand Prix. So, yeah, quite unfortunate for Hamilton, and he ends up 19th on my power rankings. Oh, and then also one more thing to make matters even worse for Hamilton. He picked up a 5-second penalty for not slowing sufficiently, basically on his recon lap to the grid re-entering the pit lane. Again, I didn't include that in my power rankings, but it meant that he picked up that 5-place grid penalty he picks up, meant that he's going to be at a disadvantage from the get-go next time out at Monza this weekend. All right, number 18, and this is Liam Lawson. So for Lawson, qualified 8th, which under normal circumstances I think would be seen as a pretty good result. He's been getting into Q3 quite a bit lately, and by lately I mean before the summer break, which of course was a month long. That being said, though, qualifying was out-qualified by his teammate, definitely outshone by his teammate this weekend in general. His teammate qualified 4th, out-qualified him by almost 0.3 of a second, 2.9 tenths to be exact. So again, that does generally, despite the fact that 8th would normally be seen as a pretty good result for a Racing Bulls car, the fact that his teammate was 4th means that at the end of the day, the car had more pace there, more potential, so he ultimately underperformed there. In the Grand Prix was on pace for a decent haul of points, and if he had finished in those in the points, he likely would have ended up somewhere in the I would say 9 to 12 range on my power rankings. But unfortunately, the crash with Sainz a little bit unnecessary. I think both drivers get blamed. So if you can tell where this is going, Sainz is probably not going to be too far from now on the power ranking. But nonetheless, a little bit of an unfortunate incident for Lawson, a little bit unnecessary on his side as well. I think he could have done more to avoid the accident and that ultimate contact. So that really, I think those two things together really hurt him on a weekend where, again, he was definitely the second best of the two Racing Bulls drivers. Okay, number 17 is the driver who had aforementioned contact with Liam Lawson. That is, of course, Carlos Sainz. So for Sainz, qualifying went very well. Qualified 9th, out-qualified his teammate Albon by 1.8 tenths of a second. So really good there on that front. And then again, very similar to Lawson, was running in a pretty good position. Looked like he was going to score a solid handful of points. But then that clumsy incident. Again, I do think both drivers do have some, share of responsibility there. I do think that penalty that Sainz got was very harsh. It was unnecessary. But nonetheless, I think, again, kind of a race-ruining incident for him. And he ends up finishing 13th on the road out of the points. All right, number 16. Number 16 is Yuki Tsunoda. So for Tsunoda, Another challenging weekend. I think he does finally break his duck of not scoring points. Finally scores points in a Grand Prix for the first time since Imola. Qualifies 12th, out qualified by his teammate Verstappen by half a second, which was the biggest gap between teammates this weekend by a pretty big margin. So again, I think the margin's a little bit bigger than you would want. And again, another race where he's knocked out in Q2. It seems like Tsunoda is consistently kind of just getting knocked out in Q2 very often. And his teammate is honestly, Verstappen seems to be a lot less consistent in terms of where he qualifies. But of course, with Verstappen, we know that that's generally because he's being limited or not limited by whatever the cars, however the car's handling on any given weekend. But for Tsunoda, regardless of how the car's performing, he seems to always kind of end up in the same spot, which is, just kind of outside the top 10. In the Grand Prix, I thought pretty quiet, anonymous Grand Prix. Didn't have a ton of great pace. Didn't look like he was going to be challenging any of the cars ahead. Was just kind of running in formation. And then, of course, benefited quite a bit from 5 drivers who were in points-paying positions not finishing the Grand Prix. Otherwise, this would have likely been another Grand Prix outside of the point. So hard to really benefit him too much, given that he basically, without that finishes, if those 5 drivers finish ahead of him, he finishes P13 and actually loses 1 net position. So, overall not a great weekend, I would say, for Tsunoda, but does finally get some points on the board. Now, number 15 is a driver who I thought I was going to be ranking 20th for my power rankings this weekend, and that is Lance Stroll. Didn't even qualify. Once again, that's the Stroll way. Sometimes don't even bother qualifying. Can't be out qualified by Alonso if you don't qualify. Crashed on his first run in Q1. Pretty clumsy mistake. Just got way too much grass on the entry to the penultimate corner, and then just basically spun off in the barriers, bounced off the barriers, and went off trundling into the pit lane in a bit of an embarrassing fashion. So again, that kind of left him 20th by default, but he did have a pretty good Grand Prix. Again, did get a little bit lucky at points, but had a couple nice moves. Overtook Bortoleto as well, I believe, after one of the safety cars, or it might have been very early on in the race. But still, nonetheless, I think the Grand Prix went pretty well for Stroll and ends up finishing 7th from 19th on the grid. So again, it kind of balances out with it. If he had a kind of a normal Saturday, if you've qualified, 11th, 12th, that kind of range, he probably ends up top 10 on this video, but unfortunately, or top 10 in power rankings, but unfortunately, really clumsy error, really silly crash on Saturday means that his ranking is pulled down quite a bit. So, moving over to number 14, this is where we kind of get a train of teammates. So, number 14 is Nico Hülkenberg, qualified 17th, finished the race in 14th. Really quiet race overall, was definitely the second best of the 2 Sauber drivers, but basically a lot of drivers getting caught up in incidents, meaning that he finishes on my power rankings a little bit higher than I think I otherwise would. If this was a really quiet Grand Prix weekend, I think I probably would have had him in the bottom row, so like 17th or lower. But a lot of drivers made some pretty key mistakes, so again, that does push up Hülkenberg a little bit. But again, Hülkenberg's been very quiet since he got that podium at Silverstone. Qualifying performance has definitely tailed off a bit. Bortoletto's definitely been the stronger of the 2 drivers. As I talked about in my video last week, looking at the qualifying analysis between head-to-head between teammates. So again, Hülkenberg's going to have to turn around. Obviously, his seat's not going to be in any danger for 2026, but if the qualifying form continues to slide into next year, I do think Audi might look at replacing him for 2027. Again, that's very, very, very early discussion for talking about 2027 silly season, but again, I do think that the people at Audi will be looking at the results and the fact that Bortoleto has been quite a revelation, and again, that does kind of make Hülkenberg a bit more expendable. All right, number 13 is his teammate Bortoleto. So for Bortoleto, honestly, not a terrible Grand Prix. Qualified in 13th out, qualified his teammate by 1.6 tenths of a second. Unfortunately, his Grand Prix really was kind of taken away from him by the fact that he had a really, really poor start. Lost a bunch of positions, I think 4 or 5 positions on that opening lap, with a very, very slow start. And then from there, very hard to get the results in the Grand Prix on a track where overtaking is very difficult. Again, gambled a bit on the last safety car, I believe, didn't pit at all, so was basically out on hard tires. But the gamble didn't work out, and he was basically quickly overtaken by most of the drivers who were chasing him. So again, a little bit of an unfortunate weekend. I don't think if this was a normal Grand Prix, I don't think Sauber would have been able to score points. But given looking at some of the cars that did score points today, where they started, I think if Bortolero had not had such a bad start, I think points might have been possible today. All right, number 12 is Franco Colapinto. So for Colapinto, a slightly better weekend, I would say, than some of the races he's had recently. Qualified 16th, again, a little bit of a deficit there, so out-qualified by his teammate Gasly by 0.2 of a second. But honestly, I thought his Grand Prix was pretty good. Generally had pretty decent pace throughout. Was even faster than Gasly at points. And then, of course, I think got a little bit lucky with the strategy at the end to finish where he did in 11th, but still made it work, made it count. And again, I think 11th is actually his best Grand Prix finish in this season. And in an Alpine car that is pretty slow, I think probably the 10th best car in terms of pure race pace, not qualifying pace, but race pace. I think 11th place is honestly not a bad result for Colapinto, so he ends up in 12th. All right, number 11 is his teammate, and that is Pierre Gasly. So for Gasly, qualified 14th. Again, that's about where we'd expect the Alpine to qualify. Early in the season, it felt like they could qualify in Q3 on a semi-regular basis, but it feels like since Spanish Grand Prix, which is where a lot of teams had their big upgrades, Alpine's really kind of fallen off the boil, and now they basically are a Q2 team at best, and on some tracks they're basically the slowest team in both quali pace and in race pace. In the Grand Prix, a bit like Bortolero, had an outside shot of getting into points, stayed out, did not pit under one of the final safety cars that we had to try to gamble on keeping track position. Didn't work out, basically ends up finishing 17th, which was dead last on the road, but still I felt like he was the stronger of the two Alpine drivers this weekend, despite the fact that Colapinto finished ahead of him. So that's why 11th and 12th there. Okay, number 10 is Esteban Ocon. So for Ocon, qualified 18th, out-qualified his teammate by 0.06 of a second. So very, very tight margins between the two Haas drivers in qualifying. Got a little bit unlucky with the timing of the safety car, timing of his pit stops. And that, I think, is ultimately why he finishes behind his teammate. But still, I thought his teammate had a really good weekend. So, in fact, his teammate is the one who ends up slightly ahead in 9th. But that being said, I do think margin's very, very small between these two drivers. So for Behrman, started in the pit lane, so started quite a bit behind Ocon. I guess a little bit, well, distance, speaking in a distance perspective, because, when you come out of the pit lane, you're basically guaranteed to basically be starting 5 to 10 seconds behind, the last place driver on the grid anyway. But for Behrman, ends up 6th on the road, best finish ever in a Grand Prix. And again, really, really strong result. Again, got a little bit lucky with the strategy, really playing in his favor with the timing of his pit stops, but I thought, pretty solid Grand Prix all around, made it count, kept it clean, and again, 9th on the road. Now, of course, I think if he had basically overtaken a whole bunch of cars and gotten into this position, without kind of the strategic kind of luck that was involved, he ultimately probably would have ended up a lot higher. But so, that's kind of how you would normally, classify P19 on the road, or pit lane, I guess, to P6. But again, because of the circumstances, because there was quite a bit of luck involved, only P9 for me today. All right, number 8 is Fernando Alonso. So for Alonso, qualified 10th. No gap between himself and Stroll in qualifying because, again, like I said, Stroll didn't set a time. I did feel like Alonso did underperform a little bit in qualifying, just because of how much pace that the Aston showed through free practice. Again, they were looking like they were going to be perhaps, I think second best team was probably a bit too optimistic, but I think they definitely could have qualified in the top 8. And so the fact that Alonso qualified 10th was a little bit disappointing. And then on top of that, finished, I think, had a bit of a poor start, went from P10 to P12 at the first lap. And then that kind of really hurt his Grand Prix as he basically went on a really unusual strategy to try to basically make up positions, and that kind of backfired a bit at the end of the race as he ends up finishing 8th instead of 7th where his teammate finished. I think, ultimately there were cars that were started well behind him, like Behrman, who finished, a couple of positions ahead of him. Even, Albon started 15th, started 5 positions behind him, but finished 3 positions ahead. So again, drivers like that, So again, I do think that, for Alonso, it was an okay weekend. Pace was pretty good, but it did feel like there was a little bit more there in the Aston Martin this weekend. All right, number 7 is George Russell. So for Russell, let's see where he is. Qualified 5th, out-qualified his teammate Antonelli, like I said, by 1.8 tenths. Honestly, for qualifying, I thought that was about right for Mercedes. I was ahead of both Ferraris, but again, felt like Leclerc maybe should have out-qualified him, pipped him to that P5. In the race, the pace was not that great. Of course, was told to let his teammate Antonelli go, but that might have been after he picked up damage with the contact with Leclerc, which again I felt was a racing incident, hard but fair. But ultimately, this weekend for Russell, the pace was not great. It felt like it was a little bit of an underperformance, but still picked up, a pretty solid P4 thanks to some of the chaos going on around him. Now, number 6 is Charles Leclerc. Now, much in the same vein as Russell, it felt like a slight underperformance from Leclerc, which is why, even though, he gets kicked out of the race, no fault of his own, that's why he's not ultimately higher. Like I said when I talked about Hamilton, Leclerc's Q2 time was actually faster than his Q3 time. And in the race, of course, got taken out by Antonelli, not his fault. Pretty decent pace, to be honest, not able to quite get past Hadjar. And again, I do think that the Ferrari was definitely the faster car in race trim. But yeah, unfortunately, that mistake from Antonelli punts Leclerc out. Nothing he can really do, and again loses a solid haul of points there. All right, so moving into the top 5, and number 5 is Alex Albon. So Albon's a bit of a tough one to gauge. Out-qualified by his teammate Sainz, out-qualified by 1.8 tenths of a second, which is a substantial margin. And again, based on the results going into the race from qualifying, I think Sainz was obviously in a much better position. Albon a lot weaker position, but Albon basically turned over that deficit, or in basically grid position between the two of them with an excellent first lap where he basically moves up to 10th, and then basically just kept it clean from there and picked up the pieces, picked up the big points where others kind of faltered around him. So I think it could have been, I think I easily could have ranked Albon, maybe 7th, put Russell and Leclerc ahead of him. But I felt the race was pretty strong, especially that strong opening lap. I think this is a race that really highlights, the contrast between the two Williams drivers. You have a race where Sainz was, out-qualifies his teammate Albon. Looks like he's on pace for, a really good points haul. But then unfortunately, through either bad luck or a bit of a, error here like it was this past weekend with Sainz, it feels like the fortunes are basically completely reversed. Albon picks up the big points and Sainz ends up with nothing. So I think the points gap between the two is not really representative of the true gap between them. But I do think on the other hand, I do think, Albon's been doing a really good job of, executing weekends, being opportunistic. And on the other hand, Sainz is just not being very opportunistic. Again, a bit of a strange way of saying it, but yeah. All right, now, number 4 is one of the unluckier drivers this past weekend. That is Lando Norris. Easily could have been on pole position, but again, loses out to his teammate in qualifying by hundredths of a second. And then, honestly, race pace was okay. Another poor-ish first lap where he gets passed by Verstappen. Again, that has been a recurring theme for the last year and a bit. And again, it's something that on a one-off like this where, he's able to easily repass Verstappen, unfortunately, having that kind of issue where he gets passed on the opening lap means that it automatically gives Piastri like a 5 or 6 second buffer. And it means that, Piastri can basically just control the gap from there. So even if, Norris is able to easily repass Verstappen, it's making things a lot easier for his teammate when he repeatedly has these weekends where he basically loses a position either to his teammate or more often than not to Verstappen on the opening lap of a Grand Prix. Of course, retired from the race from a mechanical issue. Really unlucky there. Of course, I'm not hurting him from that. So I think 4th is a pretty good spot for him. Thought it was a pretty strong weekend, but just, very, very small margins between himself and Piastri means that he ends up second best and ultimately with no points because of that engine failure. Okay, so now we get into the top 3, and I think for me, there was a big gap between the top 3, who, spoiler alert, or the 3 drivers who finished on the podium, and then basically everyone else. I think, to be honest, I think Norris was a pretty solid 4th place, but then honestly, from 5th to about honestly 9th or 10th. You could basically move those drivers around in quite a few positions. So top three, number 3 is going to be Max Verstappen. So for Verstappen, he qualified. Let's see, where is he? Qualified third, out-qualified his teammates Tsunoda by half a second. Honestly, got the absolute most out of the car in qualifying. And then in the Grand Prix, really good start. Really good start, and got past Norris there. Sorry, I'm quite tired, but I'll charge through this. We're almost done. Really good start, but then unfortunately Red Bull car just does not quite have the pace. Now, ordinarily, I think that could have easily been first on any other weekend, but unfortunately, a couple other drivers who had really, really strong weekends as well, and in one case, perhaps a career-defining weekend. So, number 2 is your race winner, Oscar Piastri. Piastri started on pole, won the race, got fastest lap, led every lap, got his first career Grand Chelem. Now, the reason, of course, you would think Sebastian getting a Grand Chelem, of course, shouldn't that be number 1 automatically? Ordinarily, I would say yes, but I think realistically, I think was quite lucky, not necessarily lucky, but fortunate that the timing of the safety cars lined up almost perfectly with the pit windows for both the first stop and the second stop. And because, you would lose so much time if you did not automatically pit that first opportunity. Norris, his teammate, was basically forced to basically follow him into the pits, and ordinarily that would not happen. Usually Grand Chelem is like, in most cases, a driver basically takes a 20-second lead in the first stint. He basically gets a free pit stop, and then he basically continues on and does that for a couple more times until, of course, he wins the Grand Prix. That's kind of, the typical absolute domination of Grand Chelem. Verstappen showed us multiple times in 2023 what that looks like. But for this one, again, it was still a very, very strong weekend for Piastri. Didn't put a foot wrong. Margins between himself and Norris very tight. And again, looked like he controlled that weekend from the off. But again, just the fact that he led every lap, again, there was a bit of context there that is a bit more understandable. And for me, that's why, again, I chose him to be second and not first. He wasn't absolutely dominant. Norris was keeping him honest. Pace was pretty close between them on track. Now, number 1, again, probably could have guessed this, but it is Isaac Hadjar. Excellent qualifying result. Gets P4, which I think probably the best he could have done. Again, there will be the odd questions about, is the Racing Bulls car actually faster than Red Bull? Not answering that question today, but still, I think, great result in qualifying. And then very, very good pace in the race. Kept it clean. Kept the faster cars behind him in Leclerc and Russell. Managed the gap between them, made sure he wasn't overtaken. Kept calm under pressure, didn't make any mistakes, and comes home for a very, very well-deserved P3. This wasn't a P3 where he basically got it completely on chaos and luck alone. He was in that position on merit. Of course, a little bit of help there with Norris. Norris's mechanical DNF, but still really, very strong Grand Prix by Hadjar. And I think it really puts him in contention. If not, it makes him the outright favorite to be Verstappen's teammate at Red Bull, which I guess, many people have been joking online. It's actually a demotion, not a promotion. Again, we'll have to wait and see for 2026 if it is indeed the case or not. But there you go. That's my power rankings for the 2025 Dutch Grand Prix. Pretty decent Grand Prix, I would say, in terms of drama, chaos. And again, looking forward to the Italian Grand Prix this week, and one of my more favorite Grand Prix to watch, especially qualifying. So anyway, thanks so much for watching, and goodbye.